Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Azarin. I'm joined here by Dan Demetriou. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dan Demetriou. I'm professor of philosophy at the University of Minnesota Morris, where I teach um, sort of ethics, applied ethics, social political philosophy, philosophy of law.
So, you've written about the incel problem a little bit, and you're familiar with Looksmaxing, right?
I am a little bit, yeah.
So, what do you think about that? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's fascinating. I've heard a little bit about it too at this clavicular
Clavicular.
right guy, and um, I'm I know people. So it's not just like it's essentially it's not just a phenomenon, evidently, of Gen Z or even Alpha young people. I know I just met a guy who's in his 40s, very accomplished man who's also doing looks maxing because and talks about it exactly in those terms because he's on the market, and sensitive to its demands. And yeah, I've been thinking about it a little bit.
Do you have like do you think it's a net positive, net negative for society?
Um, well, I guess I think of it as a reaction to pressures. There's some sort of pressures that are causing a certain percentage of people, and mostly guys, right, who are using this language, um, to to pursue this. And so there's probably some good reason for why they're doing it, right? They're not crazy. Um, and so it's our job as culture watchers to try to understand, what that is, be sympathetic to it, try to understand it. There's probably again some good reason for it, and I'm not sure what those reasons are. I mean, I'm curious what you think they are. But
So my current like working argument is that it's probably a reaction to the loss of third spaces. Um, have you read Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam?
I haven't. I've read most, well, much, some of it. Not all of it, but yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah, so like the whole like for those who are unfamiliar, the whole in the past, right? You had like your house, you had your work, and then there was often a third space like bowling leagues or a church or other spaces um that would integrate one into society, especially church. Um Nowadays like people are not that religious, and the people who, at least in my experience as a guy in New York who do go to church are like very extremely religious. And in general, like it's unique. It's weird with Gen Z because I find that we're uniquely over socialized in the sense that like we are socialized by the internet. And so how we learn about culture is through the internet, and the internet's such this is this fast evolving thing. At the same time, we are under socialized because people just don't know how to act in real life. And so I think that loss of like structure to integrate people into society, like something firm, something grounding, resulted in people not knowing how to act. I also think that in the past, like when you're like exposed to people, right? When you're in proximity to like when like a woman, for example, is in proximity to a bunch of guys, and a bunch of guys are in proximity to a lot of women, especially like adolescents, they're going to eventually find a partner. But I think if your only spaces are school and work, then it's difficult because you're not really supposed to hit on people in school.
So how do you bridge that to looks maxing?
Well, I think people don't know what to do. And I'm pretty certain that the fundamental problem is guys are not that emotionally intelligent in general. When most of my friends were kids, um, who were they friends with? They were my male friends. When most of my male friends were kids, I asked them like because I was doing a little anthropological survey work, and I asked them, who was your best friend? And they would say like, okay, like Jake. And I said, why was Jake your best friend? And the answer was almost always like, I played basketball with him, or something that like something in terms of proximity. Then I asked like my girlfriends, who was your best friend growing up? And they would say like, Jill. And I would say, why is Jill your best friend? And they would go on to say like specific things like that they had in common, or specific like an emotional connection they had, or they tell some unique story that bonded them together, um with some exceptions. And like with guys, like I've noticed like the person you're best friends with as a kid is not the person you're telling your deepest darkest secrets to. It's just whoever you play basketball with, and that sort of emotional literacy isn't really taught to most guys. um and so I think that if you're like on a dating app, right, and you have access to all these people as like a woman, you're able to first filter by looks, and then you could filter by personality. Um, versus like getting to know someone in that like slow burn sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's, yeah, that was the first thing I'm going to say, right? Is that, well, here's the story to tell is that, in IRL interactions, being charming, being charismatic, charisma is just I mean, has always been the big winner for guys. Um, I know a guy who's just so successful with women. He's not tall, he's not good looking, he doesn't play a musical instrument. Um, it's just for whatever reason, but he just has personal charisma and he does great with women. All right, but that doesn't come through in the ways that guys are trying to get women nowadays, right? So, the apps highly privilege looks, and after that, some sort of text game, if I understand correctly, having not been on apps. Okay. But this is what I'm hearing when I interrogate young people about it, or even people my age who are on apps. So, well, then you could see why guys like, if this is the first cutoff looks, then I'm just going to go all in on looks. Um, so, that's one part of the story, I think. More than like, I mean, for me, it's rational. It isn't like a function of illiteracy or something like that, or emotional stuntedness or something like that. It's just a rational way to proceed. Given that that's the first cutoff. Unfortunately, like, I mean, this is not the things that women, um, even for their own sakes, should be looking at first, right? They probably would love to know if a guy's charismatic and funny, and has these other traits, but that's what the apps favor. So yeah, they go with that first, I think. So I think that's part of the story. I think another part of the story is, um, that, like, there's just this phenomenon of intrasexual competition trumping what the intrasexual competition is for. Okay, so we use status among men, and maybe women use status among women as a proxy for what's good for securing a good mate, or lots of mates in the case of men. And like so many things that are going on, we in a highly mediated society, we we make a goal the proxy rather than the actual success condition that the proxy is supposed to be for. So for instance, like, here's a common thing that happens with guys when they start working out, right? They want to get in shape so they can be attractive to girls, and that's the goal. And then they start going to the gym, and then, like, this happens within months. Within months, they're more concerned about lifting more weight. And they're
I have a
more,
friend like that.
right, they're more concerned about lifting more weight than they are, the priority shift. They want to lift more weight just because it's a very, like, linear thing, and you could track it, and you could, and or they want to lift more weight than some other guy at the gym. And so they quickly, pursue bodies that are not actually the bodies that the average girl that they're interested in might want. So they start gaining fat because they're just trying to deadlift more, and it's like not even the sort it deadlifting does not even sort of result in the sort of deadlift maxing does not result in the sort of body that a woman wants. Okay, but hey man, it's like just it and then they get like esoteric, then they're like, oh man,
Bone smashing.
yeah, I mean, just saying with deadlift, it's like, oh, deadlifting, helps me spiritually, helps me psychologically or whatever. So I do it even though it doesn't, even if the girls don't like it, and stuff like that. And so I wonder if like some of the looks maxing thing is like that too. It's like it become being, mogging the other guys becomes an end of it in itself rather than what the goal originally was, which is to, do something that gets you past the first hurdle in talking to girls, you know.
Yeah, so I would say this is in part the case. The thing is, the Looksmaxing community is aware of this. So they have like the PSI scale, I think, which is like, I don't know what it stands for, but um it's like a scale of like how attractive someone is based on like their facial ratios, and like, but it's not like fully a measure of attractiveness. Like sometimes people comment on like my Instagram post like low tier normie, mid tier normie, and like I'm like, thanks guys. Thanks. um and like people I don't know. And I want to say something about that later, but and then they have like the sexual market attractiveness or something like that, which is like how attractive are they in practice. So I guess the PSI scale is like how attractive someone is like to the looks maxers, and then the like sexual market attractiveness is how uh attractive they are to like normal people.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's good. That's good.
And mhm.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think that may be a dynamic that's driving it. Uh, I think also there's this increasing, like again, so much it's the proxy rather than there are just so many mediated things that people are worried about more than actual mating success at this point. And that's a phenomenon you get. Supposedly Clavicular, this Clavicular guy said something about not being interested in girls.
Yeah, Clav does. Yeah, he. Okay, so a couple things. I don't know how much you know about him, and for the audience, if there's anyone who doesn't know about him, Clavicular is the guy who popularized Looksmaxing, aka Clav. Um, he he has he's on the spectrum. He's infertile because he used a lot of performance enhancing drugs. He doesn't even want to talk to women because it will distract from his looks maxing. And there's this popular meme where he got frame mogged by an ASU frat leader, which basically just means that he met an ASU frat. To frame mog someone is to be in a picture with them, and like you look more attractive than them, so you're like mogging them, like looking better than them, but in a frame. So he got frame mogged by an ASU frat leader, according to the looks maxing community, and that's important
And that
because
traumatized him or
yeah, that.
something?
Well, like no, but it was just like there's this like meme where it's like, where were you the day that Clav got frame mocked by an ASU frat leader?
So that's that intersexual competition dynamic. And so I think, so here's another pressure maybe that's pushing people to looks maxing. And you know, I had an exchange with a young, handsome 17-year-old bodybuilder who doesn't date any girls. I have a good relationship with this person, very close. And I said, man, if I look like you when I was 17, I was just, I was praising him, but I knew he doesn't, pursue girls. He's not even going to prom and stuff like that. And he's not gay. And, I don't think he's asexual. And I said, why aren't you, dating these girls? There's this cute girl that is, working. And, it's like, uh, dating girls is gay. And this really is just so very interesting, right? So I think another pressure is that um, chasing girls is being viewed as simping. All right, and 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 um, Nick Fuentes had this viral clip where he talks about Jester maxing or playing the Jester. This it I think it was the most brilliant few minutes I've heard on the internet last year. It was just such a good rant. And I could see it from his perspective. Like, yeah, I mean, there's something demeaning. I mean, he put it in such a demeaning way that was like, yeah, who would want to go through that? Of
What was
that
the
courtship. It did look very simpy. It looked very degrading, right? And so you might want to. So here's a theory. Like, suppose it gets in the culture that there's something disgusting about being like the OnlyFans simp, that the simp is actually ruining civilization politically, etc. And I don't know if you want to get into that, but so there's something very bad about being a simp, and then it gets overdone, right? So that any courtship becomes simping. All right. Then, well, what's left to you? What's left to you is not to be a pursuer in the relationship, but to be the attractor in the relationship. And that means you have to be, right, one of these elite tier 1% guys that the girls go after, waiting outside the locker room or waiting outside the, backstage or whatever, who the girls want to pursue for a short term, sexual, because you have good genes, right? You're a good genes guy. You're not a provider guy. You're not a dad, you're a Chad. And so, then, right, so it may be like that a bunch of these guys are like, look, if I'm going to get a girl ever and I don't want to simp, then I have to be attractive, then they have to come to me. That may be a pressure that's pushing them in this direction too. And there's a third one, which is, I think that I think maybe a lot of guys are thinking that in real life relationships are messy and painful. Women are going through this too. And we have this phenomenon now where I think a lot of people are realizing, look, most of the good feelings I can get from having a sexual relationship is really about validation. What if I could get most of the validation without the messiness of sex? So I dramatically lower the, complexity of my life and get like 80% of the good.
Well,
I could get 80% of the validation by being a girl who's getting a lot of likes or getting a lot of swipes or a lot of flirting. I could get, and maybe the guys are thinking I could get much of the validation by knowing I could sleep with this girl, but not sleeping with her. Why? Because, she's coming on to me, or she seems receptive. Why? Because I'm really good looking. And it's just this general trend of people withdrawing from the messiness of life to get a more, the messiness and potentially painful parts of life in order to get, but yet still get the validation. So again, this is that smashing the proxy button while avoiding the actual success condition, which would be find a mate, reproduce.
couple question or one brief question. How was Nick Fuentes using the word jester maxing when he described it?
I don't know if he even used the word Jester maxing. I haven't watched it in a long
But
time. I
how are
think
you
it just
using that?
created a meme.
How are you using the word jester maxing?
Well, uh, Je- I think Jester maxing is meant to be the ironic, um, you know, courtship, an ironic pejorative for courtship. That this sort of courtship. When he was playing the Jester, yeah, it's a sort of demeaning courtship ritual that is artificial, that is performative. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's the thing. It's performative and demeaning.
Okay,
And
because
so,
I've seen jester maxing used more generally to describe just somebody who's like performative or, like just like an entertainer, somebody who's like trying to entertain people. I'm sure it's also used in that context too.
Yeah. He was
Um,
talking about it like literally on a date, you
yeah,
know,
okay,
and like, oh, you fall down while you're ice skating, you fall down and you laugh about it. And like it was all cast in the context of a date.
okay, that makes sense. Okay, so what was I gonna say? So to your point about women, I think on the women's side, I think it's more not that they don't want sex, but you're right, they don't want the messiness of a relationship. It's that they want sex, but they don't want a relationship. And so do you know what like a situationship is? Yeah, so like that's the whole point of a situationship. Like you said, they want sex, but they don't want the actual dynamics. I think this also ties back to the emotional literacy point, which is like most guys can clear, like looksmaxing guys, a lot of them can clear the bar for like a situationship, but they can't clear the bar for a relationship. And so the guys who like, and what you're saying with charisma too, I don't look like an angel down from heaven. That being said, I do see some romantic success for myself because I'm pretty emotionally literate. And that's from talking to my friends and talking to other people, it seems that most guys, like 99%, don't clear the barrier for a relationship, and girls more and more have higher and higher expectations for guys, and guys' actual presentation, they perceive the expectations to be elsewhere, to be in looks, when in reality I think the expectations are more so in like who the person is.
Yeah. So a few things to say is one is that, um, just for the record, like I think what we're seeing is um, women increasingly not even interested in the sex. And men too, even not even interested in the sex if they could get so much of the validation without the sex. How much is swiping and getting all these compliments and so forth serving as a substitute? Of course, they're sexual beings, and men are sexual, or even more sexual beings. But a lot of work can be done by the validation alone. And so, in so many things in society, we are trading richness for convenience, right?
Yeah.
So we're almost always ready to take a simpler food if it's half the time, if dinner number one is the best meal you could have but takes a lot of time, and dinner number two is 80% as good but takes half the time, people are usually going to take that compromise, and they keep doing that. And so we just see this rush to more and more convenience but less and less quality about everything we do, including relationships, perhaps, right? So because we just really like convenience, and we're ready to trade richness. So likewise, I think we may be seeing more of that, where people are like, well, look, what's important is what I could get, like the validation at least without the complexity. So I think it's more than that. It's more dysfunctional than even the situationships, which are at least in a way sexual. Although there are benefits from people having less sex, because then these girls maybe get less sexual traumatized in some other way. But
Mm.
going on to the thing you were saying about your success. Um, versus like the looks maxing strategy, and that's the way I would view it. Like, I mean, so suppose this simple model where there's like these two different strategies, right? One is like a low investment strategy. You're highly attractive. Girls will have sex with you in short-term situations because you're a high genetic quality male.
Can I just
Okay.
qualify really quick?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
I also think that I mean my in my experience, the guy it's been more on the guy's side for not wanting. I mean, of course, it's just anecdotal, but the guys in the looksmaxing community who don't want to talk to women, I think were originally incels who got into looksmaxing but never learned to talk to women because they don't have any female friends, and having female friends is like being like a chud or whatever. And so they don't know how to go up to a woman. I've seen that for the most part, the women who are getting into lots of situationships are having sex, but just my anecdotal experience.
Oh, very, yeah. I think, yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah,
so I don't know.
yeah. Just like
Uh,
just throwing it out there.
yeah. Uh, the sort of, right. So you're seeing a big connection between a sort of incel, maybe you're on the spectrum psychology, and looksmaxing.
Oh, you say on the spectrum?
Or, well, I don't know, but
Like
some
just
sort of
like general
incel.
like awkwardness.
Okay,
Like yeah, I think like a lot of like awkward like I don't think all incels are on the spectrum, but a lot of guys aren't necessarily even socially awkward. They just don't know how to like they feel like there's some weird way you have to like talk to
I see.
women.
I see. Yeah, and it could be like a weird. So sometimes there's cross sex, what psychologists call cross sex mind reading problems, and this is just this huge issue. William Costello, who's a grad student at UT Austin working under David Buss, has great stuff on this. Um, so there's just this problem of men understanding women and women understanding men. We project ourselves onto the other sex, especially inexperienced people. And so I could imagine, I could hear a story that goes like, suppose you don't understand women well, and you think that they think like you. And then because you're looks oriented, you assume they're looks oriented. So if you want to be attractive, you have to be a very pretty male. Um, right? That I could hear that argument, right, in their heads, and then yeah, they may do that instead of understanding like this doesn't matter to women nearly as much. Whereas if they had more experience with women or more sisters or something like that, they would be like emphasizing something else. So yeah, that may be a part of it. Um, so um, yeah, it's a fascinating situation. I was listening to a podcast by Malcolm and Simone Collins, who have the Based podcast, Based Camp podcast. And they're brilliant. They have an episode on the Calhoun, sort of drawing an analogy between the Calhoun mouse Utopia experiment and Incel and
You
Looksmaxers.
talked about this in your paper, right? The Chadverse version one, I think.
I don't know if maybe I did. I can't
It might
remember.
have been like a lecture. I did a little bit of research
Oh, okay.
before I hopped on the interview. Sorry, what were you
Yeah.
saying?
Um, so so they're seeing like, so in the mouse Utopia experiment by Calhoun, I guess this was in the 50s, or um he just created these optimal conditions in certain ways for mice, except for population density. So gave them all the food they need, made it clean enough for them, and so forth. The population shot up, and then a bunch of weird behaviors started to happen. You had some females that would just neglect their kits, or whatever the baby mice are called. I forget what they're called. You would have roving bands of cannibalistic males and violent males, and then you had some males that just withdrew and groomed all day. And these were called by Calhoun the beautiful ones. And so, so Simone and Malcolm Collins are like, are Looksmaxers sort of beautiful ones? Um, maybe I don't know. But there are these other pressures that I also take seriously as well. So it may be that, right. So a very simple model would be that some guys are um go are short term, are they're successful short term strategists. To do that, though, you have to have good genes. You have to be a guy who, merely by contributing genetic material, would be attractive to the woman, even though you're not providing any sort of support for children. And then there's a long term strategist who probably maybe doesn't have as sexy genes, but is showing that he'd be a good provider and protector, or whatever. And so, and companion for long term. And so these are extremes, and it's a very toy model, right? But evolutionary psychology does talk about this, and you do see this in the wild. So there's like whole articles written. There was this famous, I forget what it was, a N- New York Magazine article written about these women that go around to NBA. They follow NBA teams and they hang outside their locker room and to just try to throw themselves at these guys to have sex with them. And, so obviously no commitment, right? But I mean, right? This is something that doesn't happen to the average average guy, right? Who has to show some sort of commitment or interest, right?
But to me, actually, all the time.
Okay, well, there you go. So, so, I wonder if these looks maxers are now like, so again, going full circle to what I was saying before is they're, like suppose you have some sort of hierarchy in your head that like, well, the best is to be that guy who could have sex without commitment. That guy's not a simp. That guy's just the prize, and the girls are having sex with him, for really him in a sense, which is like his genes. Whereas it's more transactional and you're being used if you're a long-term strategist. So if you get that in your head, then you may say, well, yeah, I want to be a looks maxer.
I think you're right. And I think paradoxically, that I think the optimal strategy is probably a combination of both. Um, and I also think that more and more we're going towards the extreme ends of like really mostly towards the extremes for like looks because we want conveniences. And we, like you said, everything. And I don't know how much of this is a function of the fact that most people in like the dating pool are younger and like haven't learned that you kind of need to be uncomfortable to like grow, or is that just like something that's, I don't know, what do you think? Has that always been a thing where like young people don't like feeling uncomfortable, or is it, do you see it particularly pronounced now? I have limited life experience,
Yeah, I
so
mean,
low sample size.
yeah, I don't think any, nobody likes discomfort, but I think the amount of discomfort that comes from just interacting with the opposite sex has spiked. It just was not a big deal back in the 80s or 90s, So, again, there's so much of this is the pressure brought about from a highly mediated age where like, so for instance, a you have so little time to sell yourself to a woman nowadays. Everything is like I remember the first time I heard, "What's your elevator speech?" when it came to like my dissertation or something. I'm like, "What's the elevator speech?" And it's like, "Oh, it's a summary of your dissertation that you could give in 11 seconds on the elevator." I was like, "Holy crap!" I didn't understand this level of intensity of, there's so much competition of people with PhDs who are trying to talk up their stuff that you need your 11-second pitch. Well, courtship has turned into, it's not a Jane Austen novel, right? Courtship has turned into an 11-second, you have 11 seconds, and and that's naturally going to push you towards certain sorts of superficiality. Um, at the gym, you only have a couple seconds to talk to this girl, or you only have a couple seconds online to talk to this girl, or wherever, why? Because there's so many people, that, the market has grown, right? Her market is now the entire city, maybe the entire country if she set her settings wide enough. Whereas my market was the neighborhood girls, you know, and they'd have to see me all the time, right? And so you know, I didn't have to have like a super short term. She didn't have to see me at my best every second or whatever. And so I think that's what's going on. I don't really know that it's a youth only thing. One of the weirder, and again, I'm not blaming men my age. But you are absolutely getting guys in their 40s and 50s who are still on the market or divorced or poly, who are out trying to compete, uh, you know, try, trying to do all this stuff. I mean, you know, there's any number of guys at the gym in their 40s and 50s, trying to be attractive in ways that men of a previous generation, just did not. But that's again because they're on the market in a way that men of a previous generation.
Okay, so a couple things. One, this reminded me of this funny joke. Once, like, being a dude on the, like, dating is very difficult because the moment a girl turns 13, you're competing with the president of the United States of America. And then, but like, a little bit of truth to that, especially
A lot
now.
of truth. A lot of
I
truth.
don't know. I don't know what you think about the current president of the United States because I know you're more conservative, right? When we could talk about that later if you want in the episode. Um, and second, I think that it, the amount of discomfort in general that like people, especially people my age, are like the discomfort tolerance for people my age in general is very low. I've found people are like, especially my age, I find are very, very unwilling to be like bored. Like I remember when I was like a kid, I was like bored all the time, and I'd tell my mom, "Mom, I'm bored." But now, if you're bored, you could just like there's infinitely many things to do. You could like doom scroll on Instagram, and that's what I think a lot of people do to pacify their boredom. And it's difficult to do hard things, and I think that's why we see in the workplace like Gen Z entering the workplace, like they kind of don't know how to act because they don't know how to do difficult things, myself included. My boredom tolerance is incredibly low. I've had to force myself to be bored, like on purpose, to be able to build up a better boredom tolerance. But it's very, very difficult to have a high boredom tolerance. You have to be almost intentional about it, I think.
Yeah. So by objective measures, um, the every generation is less able to do those things. Of course, how painful it is to you subjectively to be bored for 10 minutes is like torturous compared to how bad it was for me to be bored when I was your age. So, you are going through more pain, literally going through more pain than I went through at my age. It's not because you're, it literally just hurts more because you just have a different set of conditions. So, yeah, if we, yep. But it was not suffering. It wasn't like, oh, I got to talk to this girl. It was, it just, somehow the stakes were lower. The trust was higher between men and women.
I think,
You could just give a big goofy smile and how you doing? What's your name? And tease them and start whatever. And that was okay. They didn't like want to mace you. They didn't call you a creep. They didn't whatever, and it was just, you know, way easier.
but I think a lot of like the creepiness perceived by women is actually there. Because like again, a lot of my guy friends don't know how to talk to women, and so there's like a way to go about it where it's like you talk to a girl and you're not just like, "Hello, I have a big crush on you," like because that's kind of weird. I think you say, "Hey, what's your name?" Like, "Oh, I'm Micah." Like, and you start a conversation, and then, like, you're right, like you a little bit of teasing, whatever. But I don't think that's what's going on. I think what's going on is like guys like going up to women and being like explicitly um sexual or getting really really close with like I feel like when you start talking to a girl there's kind of two routes you can take. One is like the friend route and one is the relationship route, and there's a way to establish that you're trying to go down like the romantic route without being explicit about it. And it's like I don't know how to explain it, like you holding eye contact a little bit longer, being a little bit like playful versus being a friend is it's more like a safe kind of route, and I don't think most guys are aware of that, and so they just kind of wing it and do what, like you said, what they would want a girl to do to them.
Maybe. I'll say that I do think that there's a certain sort of autism-y type dynamic that was not as present when I was young. But you could say things like, I mean, and you just see it if you watch old TV shows. I mean, you could see some watch old yeah, I mean, like literally you could go to a girl and be like, it's the carnival, 4th of July carnival, and boom, boom, the lights are out, and romance is in the air. You could go to a girl and be like, I gotta know your name. Like, I mean, you're very, this is like black guy 101. Black guys will just, girl, I gotta know your name. And white guys not that differently. So you can be pretty forthright, right? But what is going on? Is it like, I gotta know your name? I mean, that right, that could freak a girl out. It's all in the delivery and whether or not, of course, you're attractive. But you could be,
Yes.
if you're projecting some sort of like affectionate interest, but that's not dangerous, right? If you're projecting the right mood to them, that's something you could do back then. But nowadays, even if a girl finds that kind of charming, like if her girlfriends are watching, it's just, oh, that's breaking the new taboos, and you're not suffering enough if you do that. And I get to be, sadistic in my response to you because you were that forward. Young men don't want to go through that, and they sense that the girls are um, just ready to reply with all these sort of cutting remarks that girls just were not as likely to do back then, and so they want to shield up. And the looks is like a shield. Like, okay, you don't like me, but a bunch of girls like me, and that I could get a bunch of girls, and so that's a shield I have. At least you can't call me an incel because I'm so good looking. Like this, like,
Yeah.
and if you go online, like, I mean, professors do this.
Really.
I was just on Blue Sky, and like, these female professors are talking about these, conservatives as like incel, as incel. It's like this idea has been perpetuated that, like, if you're a guy who can, and I've heard this, girls in class, get no pussy. If you're a guy who get no pussy, that's like the big nuke. It's like this huge cutting thing on whatever you're talking about, right? And so guys don't. I think young men, no one wants that in their life to hear that said about them, that they could get no pussy. So they're like, well, I'm going to look so good that can't really stick. Even if I don't get this girl, or even if I'm not pursuing a girl, I just want that insult not to be able to stick. It's a highly defensive position.
Yes. And
But
I
again,
think
this is sort of a nuclear option that was just not, that just girls were not, even in my shithole that I grew up in. I mean, these are not. I did not grow up in a nice side of town. I grew up in a bad side of town. But just the around the way girls that I would deal with would not talk to guys this way at all. Maybe they're actually better than. Maybe it's like maybe if I lived in a higher class place, this would have been more of an issue. But yeah. So I think like so much of it, I think it's just so. What gets called creepy or what gets called too aggressive, what you would say is beyond the pale, was pretty damn typical back in the 80s. And
I see. I think you're right. Um I
just not to interrupt, but just take playing hard to get. I mean, playing hard to get is an elaborate dance in a lot of societies. There's evolutionary psychology written, and like on the borders of evolutionary psychology and economics written about why it's actually a smart strategy. A girl should play hard to get to signal high value and get more resources in courtship from a guy, and maybe longer term. Right. So playing hard to get is a smart female strategy. Okay. Now combine that with some sort of perverse sick ethic that says, you're a sexual harasser if you ask a girl out twice, or if you don't get immediate positive response from a girl, which they're not even like programmed to do. Okay. Again, because it's such an adaptive strategy to play hard to get that they're not even adapted to like gush after a guy after he just, s- you know, uh, hits on her briefly. Right. So, so then, right. So then the guy's like, well, that's it. I guess, if I ask her out a second time, or if I shoot my shot a second time, I'm a sexual harasser, creep. Then the guys are, terrified. And the girls, oftentimes want them to pursue a second time. So, but this is all this toxified courtship, and ecology that we have now that has you guys just so caught up in your gears and so up in your head and so self-doubting and so forth, that I don't blame you for retreating in and just being like, you know what, this is too hard. Let the girls make the first move. And how are the girls going to make the first move? I'm just going to be beautiful and attractive and try to be that type of peacock alpha instead of like what I call the, patriarch alpha. I'm going to be a peacock alpha. I'm just going to be like a good genes guy. And then they'll make the first move on me, because if I'm the other type, then, it's just being a king of the simps or whatever, or a sexual harasser or whatever, and I don't want to be that. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in that guys are afraid of being called creepy, and also that girls are more prone to calling a guy creepy. Or I guess it's very difficult to tell, because on one hand, like I said, I'm fairly certain that guys, for the most part, or a lot of them, don't know how to talk to women because of what the simp thing. If you talk to women like casually, like as a friend, then you're like a simp. And so they never learn how to talk to women, period. Um, but as for the creepiness thing, my experience at least has been unusual because I am like weird, and so like I'm pretty okay with being rejected. Like people say like, oh, like the worst she could say is no, and then other people say no, they could say she could say a lot worse. And so, like, I'll give you an example. When I was like 15, I was at the mall with my friend, and I was like being like a cocky 15-year-old, and he was like, if you're like so good at talking to women, go talk to that like girl over there. And it was like this like emo girl like sitting by herself. And so I walked up to her and I was like, hey. And she's like, hey. And we started talking a little bit, and she was like, how, and it, like one of the first things she said was, how old are you? And she said, I said 15, and she was like, go along, child, because I guess she was like 18. And so, like, that was an example of me realizing that, like, that's like a no, right? At the same time, her initial reaction to me, while it wasn't like explicitly positive, it was reciprocal. And so I was able at the time to recognize that, like, this is somebody, like, there's a path forward. She may not be explicitly attracted to me, but she's not uncomfortable. And I think there's a very fine line between, like, there's a path forward and I can hit, like, there is a scenario where you can keep going, and there's a scenario where you can't. And it's a very fine line. And I think most guys don't know where that line is. Like, if it's over here, they think it's like, all the way over here.
Yeah. So there's this thing called the male overperception bias. And that's where guys think they have a shot with girls that they don't have a shot with. and the going view is, so for instance, if a girl just smiles at a guy, as they're crossing on a sidewalk or something, too many men are of the view. Not sorry, I shouldn't say too many men. It is the male overperception bias says, hey man, maybe she likes me. We're okay. More often he's going to err on the side of thinking she likes him than is true. So and it's adaptive because it is better for a guy to shoot his shot and get shot down and not pass up mating opportunities than to pass up mating opportunities, right? So it's adaptive. Now enter morality or enter social mores, right? And have social mores say that this is low level harassment. To then, a girl smiles at you and then you start trying to chat her up when she's just trying to walk her dog. That this is akin to catcalling. Then and you're watching like a feed of 1,000 women complaining about this. And all right, so make that a social norm. Then you have guys who are going to be more conscientious and less morally conscientious. So then you get the the quote unquote sensitive young man who's listening to this and being like, well, I don't want to be a sexual harasser, right? So so then you're going to get guys who are going to go in the opposite direction and and think like almost any. I have talked to young men. I have a nephew like this, a nephew-in-law like this, who, well, nephew, once he moved, he's like this, and he's he's he was like, I just think it's sexually harassing to ask a girl out. And I'm like, well, how are you going to find a mate, you know? And he hasn't. But again, he's super off the charts morally conscientious, where the guys who are less conscientious just blow past the, the convention, this sort of made up convention by hysterical people, often feminists who, sort of do have as part of what they're up to is somehow destroying, um, you know, gender relations. Um, and taking that whole thing seriously. So the guys who are actually less conscientious flout the bullshit norm, which and are actually, more successful and are chatting up those girls, but they have to be okay with the rejection. You're okay with the rejection, and that's a good thing. Now, this does put a certain amount of pressure on women, though. We have to be conscious of that, right? If you have like thousands of guys all getting past their fear of rejection, all hitting on you, that's an enormous amount of time out of a girl's life who's just trying to go to the mall and whatever, right? And so we have to look at it from the woman's perspective and be like, do we want to subject these girls to that amount of attention, even if the guys are relatively polite and so forth? It's just it's a lot to say, no, I'm not interested. No, I'm not interested. So what we need is conventions in place that clearly signal when a girl is more open to approach and when a girl isn't, or context where it's just known that a girl it's okay versus not okay. So for instance, you start chatting up this girl at a mall. Well, that's public. You're obviously not going to sexually assault her. There's a million reasons why she should feel you're safe. As opposed to if she's walking her dog late at night and you're late at night and so forth, and you start
Yeah.
hitting her. Okay, so can we have some sort of conventions where men know that, okay, this is a no hit time or no hit on context for a girl? That'd be good. But we have a society with everyone having their different sorts of conventions. We could all agree on the moral principle, right, that we shouldn't overburden young women with approach. And but we just need to have some sort of convention. But there's no convention. There's just all these different rules. You don't. There was this YouGov, I think, did this poll. This is old now. This is like 7 or 8 years old, about what's considered sexually harassing behavior in 5 or 6 different countries across generations. And you had 25% of girls, I think, in America saying a guy asking her for coffee is sexually harassing. And more than that, a guy just saying, "Hey, I think
Mhm.
you're beautiful," is sexually harassing. So again, like if you're a young man and you're like, well, okay, I think it's okay to ask this girl I don't know if she'd like to have a cup of coffee. But again, I don't want to be a sex pest. I don't want to ruin anyone's day.
Mhm.
And if she one of those four that's gonna think this is sexually harassing. And so guys are just gonna be like, that juice is not worth the squeeze. I'll just, not ask this girl out. And and so then we have, of course, the complaint pieces and the viral videos about why are the guys not asking me out anymore, right?
Yeah.
um
No, I think um and so what do you think the solution is to this? Like the clear conventions, yeah, but like I feel that there's a deeper problem than like once, cuz like how can one make the conventions clear in the first place, first of all? But second of all, I mean,
we need
how do
less
we
cultural diversity. There's too much cultural diversity. You can't, I mean, what does cultural diversity mean if not that there's different conventions about this sort of stuff?
But then how could that even be, like, implemented? Like,
You
inherently
stop immigration for 2 or 3 generations.
but inherently, I think part of the diversity comes from the fact that, like, on the internet, for example, people are divided into, like, micro communities. So, regardless of, like, race, regardless of whatever, the way I, like, see the world is, like, vastly, vastly different than, like, the guy who sits next to me in English, who's, like, a lacrosse player, despite us growing up in the same neighborhood, same town, same race, basically, like, yeah, um, we view the world completely differently, and go about, and like the types of girls that like I'm attracted to are very different than the types of girls he's attracted to, and so the conventions for approaching them are different, even if they're the same race, the same everything.
Uh, yeah, so one thing is I would lower the amount of new cultures coming in that confuse the cultural any sort of cultural dominant cultural convention. Um, so that would be step 1. Then, the you know, short of some sort of more authoritarian measures, you just hope that those who are successfully mating, um, like the ones who are subscribing to unsuccessful norms sort of die out, and then the ones that subscribe to some successful convention reproduce, teach their kids the convention, and some sort of organic, convention comes to dominate. Uh,
But like I said, I feel like the big threshold is not like a particular new culture coming in, it's within
you know,
like a culture, it's the fragmentation of that culture. And so if I'm like hitting on like a girl who's like Latina and like into anime, it's going to be very similar to me like hitting on a girl who's like black and into anime or white and into
yeah,
anime.
I didn't mean, yeah, it's not necessarily a racial thing at all. I'm literally talking about different cultures.
Like what do you mean?
Well, I mean, just, there's like, like a feminist sort of, certain sorts of feminist, uh, even among feminisms, of course, there's different sorts of conventions about how a guy should court, if at all.
So then how do
And
you
and
prevent
and then you have Christians, and then you have, the internet culture of, or then you have like a culture of like hookup culture, or you have, uh dance club, and you have all these sort of parallel, you know rules, and frustratingly people just lying about it, like, so people talking about one set of rules in their, when they're like in their women's studies class, and then that night going to a nightclub and adhering to and rewarding guys for a whole different set of rules. There's all sorts of stuff like that. um so I don't know. I really don't know what it take. I mean, I you could have just like, I'm not saying we should go Taliban, but it is possible to be so authoritarian that you just sort of set up rules that, um
but is that
but
really
how can
just
a non-authoritarian culture, well, you just sort of set up, maybe there's just some natural attrition, and the people who adhere to dysfunctional mating norms just die out, don't pass on their uh, genes and memes to the next generation, and those who do have successful mating cultures do, and this eventually they win out.
but I think that just letting us go through like the stages of like or just like letting us go like letting us the people who are lonely die out is a particularly bad. You talked about it yourself in your paper Chad vs Virgin, the incel, like the shootings done by incels. I think this is much bigger than like just like guys not getting laid. It's like shame, and then the shame fuels resentment, and that resentment fuels ideology, and that ideology is particularly harmful. And so I think I agree. I don't know what the solution is, but I don't think it's like immigration related since it doesn't seem to be geographically distributed. I don't. I have moral qualms with just like letting people who can't get letting incels die out, and I also have moral qualms with like an authoritarian government. I think it could this be caused by political polarization?
Well, I mean, that's a whole fascinating issue itself, like the political divide between your men and women of your generation, which again is new and certainly was not the case when I'm young. And I'm not just speaking from personal experience. I mean, like just statistically, the gaps between men and women politically were not anything like what they are today.
But I guess
Yeah,
like
so that's a huge issue, and I know a lot of my guy friends are very frustrated by this, and girls outright on their dating profile saying, no conservatives or anything like that. All the guys lie and say I'm moderate, or I'm apolitical. I know a guy who's a political philosopher who on his dating profile says apolitical.
hmm. What does he say when they ask them for
He tries to
job?
avoid the topic, as
Hmm.
long as possible. And, they smoke him, I mean, because most of the guys are, because increasingly men are moving to the right and women are moving to the left. And
So how
so
do you? Mhm.
yeah, that's another horrible thing that's going on.
But how do you fix? Because I think this is a consequence of this is a polarization of some kind, but not polarization in two dimensions, or not polarization in one dimension where it's just like you're going left and right. It's polarization in every dimension, in every single direction. We're going really, really far, and the directions seem completely like orthogonal to each other, completely unrelated, and just like different. And so, what do you? How do you even like? What do you
Um,
do about that?
I mean, I don't know because like here's a hypothesis that so like let's take the Scandinavian lesson and extrapolate it, right? So like the Scandinavian lesson was that if men and women have a lot of freedom and a lot of money and a lot of options, actually their career interests get more extremely different. So the first bit of data I think had to do something with like what's the percentage of women in engineering in Iran versus the percentage of women in engineering in Sweden. It was like right, so there's not much difference in interest between men and women in career paths in Iran, and there is significant in Sweden. Why? Because you have enough money and you have enough freedom to pursue your nature, to let your nature kind of run free. Okay, and males and females insofar as they have significantly different natures, it allows them to go more free. So maybe we have if we have a society that's rich and free, we're just going to start seeing more males and females creating environments for themselves, terraforming their own lives to suit their gendered nature, and those lives being less accommodating to the other sex, and so they're not willing to compromise. I mean, it's just why should a woman who can get almost everything she wants give up so much of what of her lifestyle to accommodate the nature of a man, and likewise a man a woman? Is it sex? Is it a desire for children? And it just seems like people, that's not proving to be strong enough for some people, especially when there's competitors like pornography, and erotic uh, literature, and a lot of free attention off the internet and so forth. So it's just it's not worth it for women to compromise in that way.
Do you think that or do you believe in redistribution of wealth? Because you gestured at it in your paper. I figured that you didn't, but just wanted to be explicit.
Uh, yeah, I'm not a libertarian. I do believe in redistributing wealth, but not for leftist reasons. and
What
not
are
and not by the way not the way the leftists, like the leftists want to redistribute money to people because they're poor and can't eat. I don't want to redistribute money because people are poor and can't eat.
Why do you want to?
That's rather low on my priority list. Why? Suppose someone's a war hero and poor. I have the intuition that we should redistribute wealth his way. Right? So, a conservative as opposed to a libertarian is more open to, and I don't really understand myself as a conservative, but I'm kind of traditionalist. I don't think there's anything left to conserve, and I'm not religious conservative, but I'm sort of a right slash traditionalist. If you're, they're not libertarians. They do believe in using state power and for various reasons for the social good. And one of those things may be redistribution, but you redistribute to people who are helping the nation, not people who are just like, um, wastrels.
But it
Not
seems,
to be not to put too fine a point on it, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I I I I would like to see money go towards people who make great sacrifices or significant sacrifices for the community.
Hmm. I also and maybe this is relevant. Poverty is is like a great predictor of violence, of mental illnesses, of lots of, not just like correlated. It's a predictor of mental illness. It's a predictor of domestic violence and tons of other issues. And so I thought what you were going to say was maybe redistributing wealth could help with the certain societal problems, but also the male loneliness problem. If you don't have to worry about like where's my next meal coming from, then you have time to work on yourself and be able to, I guess, figure figure yourself out in such a way that you may be more compelling to women.
Well, just giving there's just God, there's so much to say. First, the UBI experiments have not suggested that it actually helps in those regards. People don't like improve themselves or their lives that much at all. Secondly, a thing I want to say is that women are looking at at the ranking of men, right? So you could, if you give men at the bottom a bunch of money, if they're still if they're still in the bottom quartile, they're still not going to be attractive to women. Hell, if they're in the bottom half, they're not attractive to women. If they're in the bottom 75%, they're barely attractive to any women.
But that's
So
just
just
physically.
redistribute. Well, whatever, it in so whatever, it's going to manifest physically, their career, their whatever. I mean, if all of us if every man magically got $10 million, there'd still be this exact same ranking. Okay. And so she's like, I don't want to be with this loser that has $10 million and $1. So it's not helping the woman problem, I don't think, that much to give men money. Um Monogamy is the way that you enforced monogamy was the socialism of women. Um and it is in its way truly coercive if enforced towards women, because it just says you don't have access to that high ranking guy because he's got another girl and you have to go to number two. Oh, number two's been taken by a better girl than you have to go to number three, and just it forces them down the ladder until you know they get somebody, now until they find a match. Now that's in a world that women had to get guys. All right. um but now we have a world where um women, even if we had strict monogamy, uh, we now are in a world where women, because they can make enough money, just don't, once they're pushed down to the bottom half of guys, they're like, that's it, thank you very much, I've got my vibrator, i got I could get real sex whenever I want. um I can hire someone to move my fucking furniture. I have police to protect me. I don't need any guy.